Well, welcome back, and thanks to our sponsors for the nice refreshment break. I'm going to turn it over to Greg Sterling, who's going to moderate the next session with Paul Plant. So, Greg, take it over.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for the introduction earlier. Today, I was a last-minute add to this event because Charles Laughlin was not able to be here, and I'm very grateful to be here. This is my first time in Shanghai. But I'm not going to talk about myself right now, although you will want to be around for my indoor marketing presentation tomorrow. But right now, I think we're going to have a very interesting, fascinating presentation from Paul Plant, who was years ago with Yale Group, now Hibu, and he now runs Radicle Consulting. Is that correct? Yes. And Paul is going to talk about how you compete in this new marketplace where so many products, so many of the same products are being sold by so many different entities, and how you deal with customer churn and a number of other issues tied to organizational change. So please join me in welcoming Paul. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So.
Thanks, Greg. Morning, everybody. This is not my first time in Shanghai, so nice to be back. Neil was saying how much has changed in 9 years. My first visit here was in 1985, and it's changed a hell of a lot in 28 years, I can tell you. To the point where when you stood on the bund and looked across to Pudong, it was flat. Now it looks like someone planted a hell of a lot of concrete seeds and they just blew up overnight. It's unrecognizable from the city that I was in 28 years ago. And I have to say there's more Cartier shops in Shanghai than there are in London these days. So, and there certainly weren't any of them here when I was here last time. So it's very nice to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak. Let me find out where I can move these slides on. Just to give you a bit of background, I've worked in media and telecoms pretty much all my life. I worked with BT for a number of years. Just to correct James, BT divested its Yellow Pages business in 2001. It actually got out of the Yellow Pages business effectively in 1994 when it sold its business to ITT World Directories, which Peter was part of. At the time, he reminded me of the date in the break. I was there in those days. And Yale was IPO'd in 2002. These days, I've been out of Hibu now for 4 years. I still work mainly with companies in the telecoms and the media sector, particularly helping them with transformational change or moving from the old world into the new world. And I also spend about half my time these days working with digital startups, which is a very exciting place to be, but more about that later. The topic I'm going to talk about is customer retention, essentially about customer retention and the need to really look after and protect your customers in an age where customer loyalty is considerably less than what it's ever been. The proliferation of media has meant that the customers that we all deal with have so much choice available to them these days that we have to really look very closely, not so much at what we do, but more about how we do it in terms of keeping them and protecting them. And that's really going to be the key theme of what I talk about. As I said, we've witnessed so much disruptive change, particularly over the last 15 years since the emergence of the World Wide Web. Markets and products are increasingly becoming commoditized. Consumers are empowered unlike they've ever been before. And I think the publishing industry, perhaps more than any, has been more affected by that. The barriers to entry, the once high barriers to entry into the Yellow Pages space no longer exist, and people are emerging as competition. Pretty much overnight. You heard Neil talk about the rapid emergence of Facebook. It didn't exist the last time you were here, but if Facebook were a country today, it would be the third biggest country on the planet in terms of its population. So it just goes to show you the rapid rise in competition and how they can emerge overnight and effectively come and eat our lunch. I think without doubt, if I look at all the different companies that I work with these days across the full gamut of different industries. There is one common challenge for all of them, and that is retaining and growing the customer base. And I say that because that's particularly salient for this industry. You know, keeping the customer at the focus of what you do is a massive challenge. You know, all companies like to say that they are customer focused. You know, but for those of us who are in the consulting field, I can pretty much say that most of us realise when we get inside these companies and you look at their internal processes and how they work, you know, in some cases 80–90% of what they do is done for their own benefit and not their customers' benefit. And that is particularly true of the publishing world and particularly true of the incumbent Yellow Pages businesses. And it's a trend that I don't see improving. And for me, it's one that this industry has to do something about. And I say that with good reason. If you look at the global Yellow Pages industry over the last 10 years, and I just look at, say, the big incumbent players, the five traditional big five in the US, Canada, France, the UK. Typically, you know, across all those publishers, if you look at their customer base over the last 10 years, it's reduced by 50%. By customer base, I don't mean consumers, I don't mean people looking in the product. I mean physical paying advertisers, the people who write checks and pay money to us. It's about 50% of where it was this time 10 years ago. And that for me is a simply unsustainable statistic. So let's just put that into context. You know, I was with a Yellow Pages company that traditionally grew its revenues just by adding yield year on year, going back to the same customers, asking for more money and just pushing the ARPA up and up and up. And of course that's kind of hit a brick wall in the last 2 or 3 years, and now the revenues are in decline, and also the customers, you know, are also in rapid decline at the same time. And we've got to do something about that. The truth is there are plenty of examples inside and outside this industry of companies that are doing things right, or doing things that are helping to retain customers and grow them. And that's really what I want to talk about this morning. If you look at most companies and their causes for churn, and churn is the big issue, I would suggest, not just in this industry, but many others. I work in with quite a lot of telcos, and they too are going through exactly the same consequences of commoditisation. The cause of churn can normally be put down to just 2 factors. One is the customer's perception of the value delivered by the product offering. And secondly, it's how that product is fulfilled or serviced. Doesn't matter where you look, you know, how you analyse the data. The causes can normally be found in one of those 2 buckets. And increasingly it's the one on the right that is making the difference, because as I say, the product offering is becoming pretty commoditised. You know, most Yellow Page publishers around the world today are selling websites or selling Google AdWords. You know, the product is essentially the same no matter which publisher or which source of supply you go to get it. How it's serviced and fulfilled is often the critical factor that determines whether that customer decides to stay with you or whether they go somewhere else. A lot of customers tell me that they really are, or a lot of publishers tell me that they are customer focused. Yet when you look at their churn figures, they don't reflect that. You know, and you've got to ask yourself, why is that? You know, and particularly in this industry, it's an industry that has very much grown around its own processes, around its own go-to-market processes and procedures, driven typically by the publication of an annual Yellow Pages directory. And of course, consumers and advertisers today don't really care about when the Yellow Pages book is published. They want us to deal with them in their time and not on our time. And that, for me, is one of the biggest and most key changes that we have to change. I'm going to use some examples from companies who I think do get it right in terms of giving great product and also great customer service. I'm going to use 3 examples from outside the publishing industry and one example from the inside. And I'm also going to use examples from both ends of the price spectrum, because there is a kind of myth that to give great service, you have to charge a lot of money for it. It's not cheap. And yes, there are examples at both ends, and I'm going to use both ends of the price spectrum. And I'm going to start with one that you're probably familiar with in this part of the world, which is Singapore Airlines. Traditionally renowned as probably one of the finest carriers on the planet, but also traditionally not cheap. Yet, if you look at across the Pacific, there's a little company called Southwest. Believe it or not, Southwest have exactly the same level of customer advocacy and customer satisfaction as Singapore Airlines. Yet Southwest is the pioneer of the low-cost flight market. What Southwest and Singapore have in common is that they empower their employees to give the customer what the customer wants. Even if sometimes that means going against the processes of the parent company or going against what your boss is telling you, they firmly believe that putting the customer at the heart of what they do and giving a great basic service is really the reason why they exist. And Southwest is a classic example of a company that launched quite a few years ago now. It's been going for the best part of 20 years, but they saw that the old incumbents in the flight market in the US were abusing their customers. Southwest came in and just gave the customer what the customer wanted and gave it to them at a fair price. And their loyalty levels and advocacy levels are as high as a company like Singapore Airlines. I'll use a very similar analogy from the hotel industry. Of course, if you want luxury and the finest service and you're prepared to pay for it, then you'll go and stay at the Four Seasons. Believe it or not, there's a small hotel chain in the UK that has customer advocacy levels just as high, and in some cases higher, than the Four Seasons. It's a brand called Premier Inn. Premier Inn is very cheap, incredibly cheap. You turn up there and it's literally just a room and a comfortable bed, and that's about it. But they listened to their customer insights. The customer insights from Premier Inn told them that most of their customers are business travellers or people who have travelled a long distance with a family. All they want when they arrive at a Premier Inn is a room that's ready, and a room that's clean, and a comfortable bed. Guess what? All Premier Inn do is give you a very basic, nice, comfortable room with pillows of however fluffy or hard as you like them, and a comfortable bed and a comfortable mattress, and they give you a peaceful night's sleep. And the whole of their advertising and marketing is based around the fact that they give you great service and a great night's sleep. And guess what? They have customer advocacy levels exactly the same as someone like the Four Seasons. Yet the Four Seasons charges something like 10 times more for a room for the night. I'm going to use another example from a sector where you would never expect great service. I'm going to talk about banking. Now, of course, if you really want the upper end of the banking spectrum, you'll go where our queen banks, and that is you'll go to Coutts. But Coutts is a rather expensive bank and a rather exclusive bank. But Coutts has fantastic customer advocacy. It's also, believe it or not, a very innovative bank. It wins loads of awards for the way it innovates around new product, around innovation, around the internet, around digital. And yet the bank has been going since 1692. So don't believe dinosaurs can't change. This is a dinosaur in a dinosaur industry like banking that really does pioneer. However, we all can't afford to bank at Coutts. I certainly can't. And in 1989, the Midland Bank, as it was in the UK, launched a new branch or a new brand called First Direct. First Direct was not a high street bank. First Direct is an internet, or at the time it was a telephone bank. And then when the internet came along in the mid-90s, it's now an internet and telephone bank. And First Direct broke pretty much every rule there was in banking. Whereas all the main banks were renowned for long queues and high charges, First Direct, they launched an advertising campaign that basically insulted all the other banks by effectively highlighting all the things that were wrong with the banking industry. And with First Direct, if you phone them up, you don't get IVR, you get put through to a real person who speaks English, not Indian or Philippine English. You know, it's a real English person based in Leeds in the north of England. And they normally answer the phone within 2 rings, and they give you exactly what you want. And their charges are also amongst the cheapest of UK banks. And guess what? For most of the last 10 years, every single survey done by the Consumers Association in the UK has the #1 bank as First Direct. So it just goes to show that at both ends of the price spectrum, you can deliver fantastic service. Some of you may be aware of a company in the US called Zappos. Funny enough, Greg and I were talking about this presentation earlier, and he hadn't seen my slide there. And he said, yeah, you should talk about Zappos. I said, well, funny enough, I just happen to have a slide in my deck. How many people here have heard of Zappos? Familiar with Zappos? About half of you. Well, for the rest of you who haven't, Zappos is a fantastic story. Zappos is an online footwear retailer based in Las Vegas. It's one of the internet's most successful stories in e-retailing. The business went from startup to $1 billion in revenue in less than 10 years. And the whole principle of the business was to deliver fantastic customer service. In fact, their slogan is, we're powered by service. And it's a pretty phenomenal story. Tony Shea, their CEO, he makes no secret of the fact we set out from day one to deliver what we call a wow customer experience. He delivers happiness. The title of his book, and if you haven't got it, I urge you to read it. This is some salient lessons in how to build a service business inside this book. It's actually called Delivering Happiness. And it's what they do. In Zappos, basically their #1 premise is to make sure they deliver a happy customer. And as I say, it's all about delivering the wow experience. Get your customers to think, wow, what a fantastic experience. And there's a great reason why you want to seek for the wow in your own business in this day and age. Because if you do deliver a wow experience, the chances are your customers will go and talk about it. But it isn't like the old days where they would just tell their neighbour across the fence or their friends when they're down the pub or in the bar in the evening. In this day and age, when you deliver a wow experience, the chances are they go on the social networks and they'll tell literally millions of people at the same time. Now, of course, that can also work in reverse when you deliver a less than wow experience. So make sure your wow experience you deliver is a positive one. So I've been looking around this industry to say, well, where are the publishers, or where are the shining lights in media and publishing who deliver the wow experience? I'm going to talk about one company that I work with a fair bit, and it's the guys at So Local in France. Some of you will know them as Pajon, the old Yellow Pages business who changed their name back in April this year. The nice thing about So Local is that they are a company who put the customer at the heart of what they do. And it's reflected in their results, it's reflected in their levels of customer advocacy, their customer satisfaction scores, the whole of their business, everyone in sales, production, IT, doesn't matter what department you're in, you are measured on Net Promoter Score. So things like customer retention and customer satisfaction have a direct influence over your pay and your remuneration and your bonuses. And I'll give you a great example of where So Local are different to many other publishers. Like most people in this industry, we've come to realise that having a hosted presence on the internet is perhaps the new anchor point for engagement with the customer. Selling websites. If we sell a hosted web proposition, that is going to be the nature on which we start our discussion and our relationship with the customer. That's pretty logical, because if you think about it, as long as a customer is in business, the chances are he's going to keep his website. So if we have that website hosted and managed on our network, then it gives us an excuse and a reason to go and talk to him and build a relationship with him constantly. Rather than in the old world of just having to knock on his door every year, once a year, to try and extract as much money out as we can out of him to buy in the Yellow Pages. So Local, have taken to selling websites. Since they launched this strategy 2.5 years ago, they've sold well in excess of 150,000 websites to French small businesses. They are the largest seller of websites to businesses in France. But selling websites is one thing. Fulfilling them is something else altogether. And So Local have followed a very different path to many Yellow Pages publishers in the sense that the whole process, soup to nuts, end to end, is managed and conducted in-house in France with French people. They don't use any offshoring, don't use any outsourcing, don't use any partnering. Whereas if you look at most of their peers and most of their publisher peers, certainly most of the incumbents in the US and also elsewhere in Europe, they either partner to have their digital products fulfilled, or they outsource, or in some cases offshore them, most notably out here in India or in the Philippines. Yeah, if you look at the difference in the results of So Locals, particularly customer retention and customer advocacy compared to their peers, it kind of justifies the approach that So Local have taken. Jean-Pierre Remy, who I get to see pretty much once a month, he and I have had this discussion many times about why he has decided to do things differently. And he will tell you pretty much openly, he could easily save 30 euros per customer by offshoring or outsourcing his website production. But he sees in this day and age the opportunity to build a relationship with his customers by doing all of that work in-house with his own people. Every single touch point, every single customer engagement gives him an opportunity to either gather content, to listen to his customers, to find out what they're saying to him, and as a consequence build a much deeper and much stronger bond with his advertisers than pretty much any of his peers. And the proof of the pudding is when you look at the retention. If you look at most of the European peers, in terms of their customer retention in this day and age, it's around 70%. 70% is being kind to some of them, because it's much less than that. If you look at So Local, their customer retention is 85%. So every single percentage of retention to him represents somewhere in the region of about 13 to 15 million euros. So it's kind of worth his while keeping that process in-house. And of course, the great beauty of having retention up in the high 80s% is it means that he doesn't have to spend so much of his salespeople's time and energy recruiting new business. And the old saying that it costs 7 times as much to recruit a new customer as it does to keep an existing one. It's probably still just as much true today as it's ever been. So there's perhaps a lesson in there, and it's perhaps a lesson that kind of rings true to all of us. If we say we're going to be customer focused, we really have to, get to know and understand and build a relationship with our customers. Traditionally in this industry that has been pretty hard to do when all you're doing is an annual drive-by shooting or a once-a-year hit to try and extract as much revenue out of them to go into a telephone directory. We now sell products that are dynamic, all time, every time, 24/7, 365. We have to find a way and means to engage with our customers when our customers want to talk to us, not when it's expedient for us to contact them simply because of the time frame of the publishing of a Yellow Pages directory. That means getting to know them, getting to understand them, getting to listen to them. The best salespeople in the modern arena, and by the way, this applies not just in publishing, it applies in telecoms, it applies in a lot of other industries that I'm familiar with. The best salespeople of all are the ones who know more about their customers than know more about the products that they sell. In fact, in this day and age, you can't expect to be an expert in every single product. You know, if I look around the publishing industry today, and you know, you saw it in the past two presentations, you know, the number of products that a salesperson is expected to sell can be anything from 12 up to, you know, 20 or 30 different products. These aren't the days anymore where, you know, just having an expertise in one product or one medium is good enough. You know, and so you know, the way you go to market is you build teams of expertise, you know, where the salesperson, you know, is really just a gateway into many different avenues within the company. He doesn't have to be an expert in everything, but he does need to be an expert in customer relationships. And that is really where, you know, the insight I'm seeing, certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, in terms of the big change in this industry. You know, it's about getting to know customers far more than about getting to know products and getting to know markets. And that's because, you know, it ain't like this anymore. You know, when I first started selling Yellow Pages in 1986, there was only us and the local newspaper group, and we pretty much had the market to ourselves. And of course it's changed a lot since then. If you look at the marketplace today, traditional media have been sidelined, and you've got, you know, all these others now trying to compete. So it's not just Google. You know, you've got, you know, Facebook, Groupon, Foursquare, Bing, Yahoo, everyone you can think of. Everyone wants access into that small business market. And if you look at where the real competition exists today, you know, and one of the questions I tend to ask most of the companies that I deal with when I get to work with their senior directors, I say, who do you really see as your competition these days? And 9 times out of 10, you know, they'll say Google or Facebook. But the reality is the dollars are not going directly to Google and Facebook. If you really want to see where the competition is in this day and age, sorry, it's here. You know, it doesn't matter where I look in the world. You know, if I'm down with Census in Australia, if I'm with So Local in Paris, if I'm with my old friends in Hibu in the US or in Pennsylvania with Yellow Book, you know, this is where the real competition is these days. There are thousands upon thousands of local, what I would call corner shop media sellers. You know, web design shops, friends in garages, you know, college students in their back bedroom building websites with their friends. You know, little SEO, SEM houses all over the place. In fact, a piece of research that we've done recently in France, you know, shows that there are something like, you know, 200 or 300 of these. In most of the major cities in France, you've got a few hundred of these competitors. These are the people where the local ad dollars are going. That's where the local customers are going. When I talk about 50% of the paying advertisers leaving this industry, this is where they're going. They may be spending their money with Google and Groupon and everybody else, but they're not spending it directly. James will tell you that. You know, most of those people are going to local corner shops to spend their money these days. And I think that represents a huge opportunity for this industry. Because if you think about it, Yellow Page publishers and media groups have far more clout and buying power with the Googles and the Facebooks of this world than any corner shop ever will have. You know, and we need to get out there and start engaging with these people, not treating them like competitors, not treating them like rats and mice, as I heard someone call them recently. These are your new allies. These are the people who should be reselling your product, reselling, you know, your media products for you. And in return, you should be aggregating their data into your network. And that's another story. You know, I could spend, you know, an arm and a leg talking about data, but time doesn't permit me to do so today. But just on the subject of data and talk of customer retention and customer advocacy, it's interesting that for the last 2 years, the same company has been named the world's most customer-centric company. Anyone have a guess at, you know what I'm talking about? Price, anyone guess it? I wish. Amazon.com for the last 2 years has been named the world's most customer-centric company. And I find that kind of odd, because if you think about it, Amazon is a pretty faceless and voiceless corporation. I don't know how many people here have ever spoken to Amazon. I've ever met face-to-face with anybody from Amazon, but certainly in the US and most of Western Europe these days, most of us have an engagement with Amazon. And it's pretty phenomenal when you think about it, because they know an awful lot about us, even though they've never spoken to us. All they do is capture a little bit of data from us every time we go online. They know what we like. They know what our friends like. They know what our interests are. They know what our friends' interests are. They intuitively contact us when they think we might be ready to buy something. And guess what? 50% of the time when we get an unsolicited email from them, we look at it, and guess what? 30% further of the time we click on it and we buy something. It's a pretty phenomenal story of how Amazon has got into the psyche and the minds of so many millions of consumers around the world without ever having, a face-to-face or a verbal engagement with anyone. And I could spend, another, half an hour up here just talking about Amazon. A guy who used to work for me at Hibu has recently taken over as head of sales for Amazon in the UK. He shared with me recently the Amazon leadership principles. So if you want to go and work at Amazon, Jeff Bezos, there's plenty of videos on YouTube if you want to look at them. Jeff Bezos at Amazon makes absolutely no secret to all his employees. You put the customer at the first thing of all you do. And when you join Amazon, you get a one-page sheet of their leadership principles. Number one is this: Amazon leaders obsess about customers. By the way, number two is reread number one. Because if you can't obsess about customers, Amazon really don't want you employed there. And I think, therein lies a good place to finish. If you put the customer at the heart of what you do, then you don't really, everything else comes to you as a byproduct of giving fantastic customer service. Too many businesses, I think, in this industry, and if I think back to my former employers, have become too distant from the consumer. We've worried, since the days of IPO that we were talking about a little earlier. You become obsessed with shareholders and dividends and that kind of stuff. When really things like dividend and shareholders and all the value and stuff you get out of it, that comes to you as a byproduct of doing something else. And that something else should always start with the customer. And as I say, if this industry is going to get back on its feet, and by the way, I firmly 100% believe that the opportunities in this industry are greater today than they have ever been. The number of people, the number of small businesses out there who are buying digital products is greater today than ever bought Yellow Pages out at the peak of the Yellow Pages industry. They need our help more than ever. But we've got to dust ourselves down and start focusing on delivering great products, servicing them fantastically, and giving exceptional customer service. I think if we start doing that again, then there's a future for this industry. Thank you very much for listening.
We've got a few minutes for questions. If there are questions for Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Question for, I think I heard in the session earlier, I heard messaging around where the product solutions, what was going to be over the next 3 or 4 years, kind of the products that SMBs were going to need to have. And I heard a message around kind of the need, because of the complexity of those products, around us all getting better at managing partnerships to deliver those solutions. And then I heard part of your message around churn, saying that people have been most successful in kind of delighting customers and retaining and creating loyalty are building their own solutions, or at least the case of Solomo. Is that, are there kind of, is there a tension in that, and is it deliberate, or?
Well, it depends. I suppose the honest answer to that is it depends. It's how you bring partner products into your portfolio. If you're trying to just sell a menu of products, I think you're going to start trying to push water uphill. At the end of the day, as I say, you have a small business customer there who needs help. The easiest way we can help him, and I put it very simply. One, you have to make your product suite easy for your salespeople to sell. And then but most importantly, you have to make it easy for the customer to buy. If I look at SoLocal, and SoLocal are a good example. SoLocal have 17 different digital brands. Yet across the whole of their portfolio, if I'm a salesperson working in France, I pretty much sell only one of 3 different things. So the way the products are packaged and bundled effectively gives me just, effectively a bronze, silver or gold package to sell. And I don't get into a discussion with the customer about how many different product components make up that package or bundle, if that makes sense. Yeah, so it's putting your sales language into a language that makes it easy for the customer to buy. If you start trying to show him pie charts with 20 different media on, and this one will give you X% of inquiries, and this one will, he's switched off within 20 seconds. It doesn't work like that. At the end of the day, you're still trying to find out, I think, in a fact find with a small business, just 4 things. What type of ideal inquiry does he like to handle? What's his capacity for them? Where does he want to get them from geographically, and how much he's prepared to pay for them? If you can get the answer to those 4 questions, then pretty much, if you've got a good enough product, you should be able to, suit his needs.
Just to follow up on that, does that put more burden on the knowledge of the fulfillment team in the back office? Because I'm assuming that they have personal interaction with the customer. So the sales rep, yes, they gather that 4 pieces of information. Their level of knowledge doesn't have to be that sophisticated, so that addresses some of the sales concerns.
Did everyone hear the question? I don't want me to repeat it. It's basically what's the level of complexity in the back office, if you're not expecting the salesperson to know everything. And that's a really good point. And I'll just very quickly walk you through the SoLocal process. If I'm a salesman in SoLocal and I go out and sell a bronze, silver or gold package, typically within 1 hour of that sales call being complete, bearing in mind SoLocal have been a paperless sales force for probably about the last 7-8 years now. Most of their sales orders are captured either on an iPad, tablet, or on a laptop by a telesales representative. Typically within 1 hour of that order being, order process, that button being hit on the iPad, a seamless BI interface works across the whole of SoLocal in production, in telesales. Everyone sees the same single view of the customer. So someone in a fulfillment team somewhere within 1 hour is back in touch with that customer, finding out all the places where he currently markets, all his URLs, getting copies of his brochures, and they already start to build and aggregate the content for his digital proposition. Over the course of the next few days, a number of discussions take place backwards and forwards, where they are gathering more data and going back and verifying with the customer, to the point where typically within less than 1 week, typically 4 to 5 working days, that whatever digital property has been sold goes live. To put it into context, most of the other publishers that I work with, that process typically takes at least 15 work days, and in some cases more than 30 work days.
So, Paul, a question. You sort of make the assertion that insourcing is better than outsourcing. But isn't it really about a process rather than whether it gets done internally? Because, seeing this from where I sit with a company that does outsourcing work, what they see is the order got signed on the 1st of the month,
Bingo.
and they got the order to do it 19 days later.
Yeah, bingo. That's just I'm I'm a big fan of Buzzboard, and I advocate your work, to all the people I work with. But I'm not advocating whether it's about insourcing or outsourcing. It's about having a slick and robust process. Jean-Pierre Remy, who for those of you who don't know, the CEO of SoLocal is not an industry veteran from this industry. Jean-Pierre came in to SoLocal about 5 years ago, and his background was he was global CEO for Expedia. So he ran a world-leading digital business, and he knew, what it took you know, to deliver great customer fulfillment, and it was about building seamless business intelligence interfaces across your organisation and giving a seamless single view of the customer back outwards. And to that point where Neil has just said, no names, no pack drill, but one of my clients exactly sits into that process that you've just said, where they'll take an order on one day, but it won't go through until the outsourcer until more than 2 weeks later. That's an issue with the publisher, not an issue with the outsourcer. And I'm not saying for 1 minute that So Local don't trust their outsourcers. They've just simply taken the process that says we're going to keep the relationship with the customer in-house.
Paul, you continue to be around for the rest of the conference.
I'm here until Friday, if anyone wants to hang around that long.
There are many more things, specific conversations that we can have around this question of how do you transform and how do you implement these processes. But we have to move on to the next speaker. So please join me in thanking Paul for his